Is week 4 of the 2025 college football season going to be the first flat weekend? I would say yes, because teams expected to play in the next 12-team playoff don't have a high-profile opponent for this week's slate of games. Plus, last year's viewership dipped around week 3 and week 4, but I could be wrong. So, week 4's big games of the week. Auburn heads to Norman for some possible revenge against the Sooners. Illinoissss battles Indiana, where that game has the potential to decide the 4th place spot for the Big Ten. The Michigan Wolverines are back in Lincoln, Nebraska to take on the Cornhuskers, and Missouri hosts South Carolina, which might be the SEC's version of determining their 4th place team too. Game 1 is where we might see the Auburn Tigers beat Oklahoma for the first time in program history. Or do the Sooners and Coach Venerables defend the Palace on the Prairie from another Alabama school? There is also a former Sooner quarterback in Jackson Arnold coming back to Norman. Arnold transferred to the visiting school in the winter portal window and is the new QB1 for the Tigers. He threw for over 1,400 yards, rushed for almost 500 yards, and only had 3 interceptions in 9 games. Who knows what the stats would have been if he played the other 4 games for Oklahoma, or had an offensive coordinator that set him up for success. The new Auburn quarterback should like his transition with the new targets at wide receiver he is working with, Cam Coleman and Malcolm Simmons, who had 77 receptions together and combined for over 1,000 yards in receiving, plus the addition of former Georgia Tech Yellow Jacket Eric Singleton Jr. The Tigers defense, who actually did a great job in last year's encounter at home by giving up 48 less yards than their season average per game, but Auburn has less than half of the current 11 from that defense. Maybe they fill those holes with the 8th best transfer portal class from this past offseason. For Oklahoma, who we talked a bit about for their matchup against Michigan in week 2, in this game, we should see improvements in total offense by this part of the season, with their new quarterback, John Mateer, and running back, Jaden Ott, who both for their former programs did a lot with not much around them. The duo should pair well, as this season most of the Hogs in the trenches have been on campus for more than a few years now, as it's been a new face situation at the offensive line for Oklahoma. The wide receiver unknowns for the Sooners come from the FCS through the portal. Javonte Gibson and Keontez Lewis may be the answer for Oklahoma, as they combine for over 2,000 yards receiving. Lewis also has 121 on the ground with a touchdown to add. That is where OU can make up for last season's lack of production out wide, and obviously staying healthy will help out too. So, this one at the Palace on the Prairie should be a tight game and perhaps spiral into a shootout that you don't want to miss. Game 2, we get on the bus and cruise over to Tom Osborne Field in Lincoln, Nebraska, for a couple of programs with the most loyal fan bases, and where the Cornhuskers this season have a chance to end a 4-game losing streak to the Michigan Wolverines, and have lost this game by a 29-point average. Nebraska comes into 2025 with the 13th best portal class, where they got 1 new offensive lineman from Alabama, and is expected to protect sophomore quarterback Dylan Raiola and create better lanes for the running game. The Huskers also picked up some support out wide, with Isaiah Hunter transferring from Cal and had an average of 14.4 yards per catch, plus Dane Key from Kentucky, who bettered that average with 15.5 yards and 715 yards receiving. Matt Rule's top 10 run defense will have to come in clutch for this game, as they were number 1 for 2024 in opponents' first downs given up on the ground, while keeping most teams under 100 yards. It's plain and simple, shutting down the run for Michigan and putting the ball in the hands of a young quarterback is just a good recipe for success. All right, we get to Michigan, who might have another drop-off season of output and pounding the rock per game. With 2 years in a row of ins and outs at the offensive line, they will have to be closer to perfect in another tough road game early in the season. On top of that, Michigan's wide receivers, who none last season registered over 150 yards of receiving or stayed healthy for most of the year, is a bit alarming when getting into those stats, and hopefully they will be able to air it out by week 4. The Wolverine defense and what they allow is where this game will come down to, because as they lose more pieces from the 2023 team that was top 5 in yards per play but dropped down to 12th for 2024, we might see it get worse, even though Nebraska yards per play last season put them at 106th. The Cornhuskers should ascend with a more experienced quarterback and upgrades we mentioned already. So, the streak between the two has the potential to end and swing red while leaving Michigan fans emotionally blue, which makes it a top game for week 4. Game 3, we stay in the Big Ten. Illinois squares up against Indiana in Bloomington, a matchup that is more well known as a basketball rivalry that has now elevated when the two meet on the gridiron, for at least this season. Starting with the Hoosiers, who made a surprise appearance, but not to their fans, in the 12-team playoff last season with first-year head coach Curt Cignetti. We'll still have some pieces that follow Cignetti from James Madison, but like last year, the Hoosiers loaded up in the portal, with 4 of the expected defensive starters coming from college football free agency. It will be feasible to replicate the number 2 defense of 2024, something that Indiana may be better with their 2025 schedule. The offense mirrored the D in the 2025 offseason with adding Fernando Mendoza, the number 4 quarterback available, and who had similar stats to Indiana's 2024 quarterback Curtis Rourke. Mendoza will have some wide receivers to work with in Elijah Sherratt and Omar Cooper Jr. coming back for the Hoosiers. And if they can get that running game going in 2025, this offense again could shape up and turn itself into a true total offense. The Illinois Fighting Illini come into the new season with a lot of hype that they also warrant, beginning with their offensive line that has 4.5 returners from 2024 and even got some depth out of the portal. Quarterback Luke Altmaier, who keeps improving in total yards year after year for the Fighting Illini, but we have to mention Illinois does lose some output at the wide receiver and running back positions. Brett Bielema, who comes into his 5th season as head coach, should bank on what they did last year by going to free agency at wideout and allowing another back to step up. Speaking of stepping up, the Fighting Illini defense has about 6 returners, which should be a good start in building a defense that can get into the better half rankings of yards per game. Another note for this defense is the portal pickups. 3 of the 11 expected starters come from the same school. This kind of move seemed to work out for Indiana last season, and we'll see if it translates well for them. So, if Illinois can play at a high level in the secondary, this should turn out to be like the last couple of times these two meet, a banger with a 3-point difference. Honorable mentions for week 4. SMU versus TCU, for at this moment, the final time, because there is no future date scheduled between them to battle for the Iron Skillet. Florida leaves the swamp to meet the Hurricanes in Miami and play for in-state bragging rights. USC and Michigan State go at it in the LA Coliseum. Can the Trojans get an expected win against a Big Ten foe in year 2 of their new conference? And North Carolina heads to the bounce house where the Tar Heels clash with the UCF Knights for the first time. The final game for the week, Game 4, Missouri welcomes South Carolina in an SpOp preseason ranked matchup. Last season, the Gamecocks and head coach Shane Beamer ended a 5-game losing streak to Missouri. That game was the closest it has been since Drinkwitz came against Beamer for the first time as head coaches. We haven't talked about South Carolina since our honorable mentions for week 1, so we start with them, who might have one of the best defenses going into 2025 with some pieces coming back, and also had the number 16 defense in their last campaign. The bookend pair that helped contribute 11 of the 41 sacks for the Gamecocks, Dylan Stewart and Brian Thomas Jr. return. South Carolina does lose some stellar players to the NFL that help get them some of those results, but we'll see if Beamer's portal pickups are able to get that production for 2025. The South Carolina secondary will have some key figures from 2024 back. Jalen Kilgore, who had 5 interceptions alone, DJ Smith, and a transfer, Brandon Cisse. Cisse was the number 9 quarterback out of the portal and had some pretty solid numbers while only playing in 7 games last year. If the Gamecocks defense can continue to improve like last season and getting Missouri closer to their average yards allowed, which they didn't do in the previous game and still won, plus their offense keeping them off the field, Beamer will have a good chance at getting another one over Drinkwitz. Now to the home team, who play South Carolina for the first time in September since 2019. Don't know why the scheduling for some SEC matchups have flipped 180 on what week each other plays. We mentioned this for the Georgia and Tennessee game. Anyways, back to the Tigers that have a lot of offensive production to replace, but seem to have on paper made some great moves in college football free agency. Starting with Bo Prepula, who was the number 11 quarterback in the portal and will get a chance to start in Columbia. Missouri also got the number 6 running back, Ahmed Hardy, out of UL Monroe. Hardy was a freshman All-American. And at wideout, Kevin Coleman Jr. Coleman was one of the few bright spots in a struggling 2024 Mississippi State offense. Regardless of these additions for Missouri, they will have to outperform anything on paper, which is kind of weird because the last 2 times Mizzou has played the Gamecocks, the Tigers have done that, but lost last year in a 4-point game, while the year before they won by 22. So, if Drinkwitz's defense can keep the South Carolina quarterback sellers quiet, who a lot of us that talk about college football are buying, Mizzou at home will get their first SEC win of the 2025 season. But to be honest, this one is hard to measure. With the stats playing tricks with previous matchups not lining up right, I expect this game to be, well, a banger, because both schools want to start their conference schedules off with a big win. Okay, we'll see you guys again for some more week-by-week previews for the 2025 college football season, and bye-bye for now from the couch.